Was the 1970s the best decade for music? We'll talk about that coming up next on Music Meanderings. I'm Mike Lamneck. It is Music Meanderings, and the 1970s stand out as a magical decade for many reasons, and for music especially, where culture and artistry all met together to create some classic songs and albums that continue to influence artists and get listens today. Now, from the rise of new music genres to legendary bands, the 70s offered a rich, diverse musical tapestry no other decade has quite been able to match. Now, one of the defining features of the 1970s was the explosion of the diversity of music. You had rock, soul, funk, disco, punk, even early hip-hop, all converging together, and a lot of times on the same radio station. It was the day of true top 40 radio. Whatever was popular, no matter what the genre of music, it all met together on one radio station. Well, that was to change as the 70s went on, and we'll talk about that coming up. But bands like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Queen were being commonly found on a new type of radio station, album-oriented rock, or AOR for short. Now, AM radio began to fade as new, better-sounding stereo FM receivers hit the market and channels dominated. And, well, the Beatles were still out there as well. They disbanded, but that led to solo careers for Paul McCartney and John Lennon, also putting out some great releases. George Harrison and Ringo Starr. Actually, Ringo Starr had the most success of any solo Beatle in the early 70s. The Rolling Stones are still there. They launched into the decade with some of their best work, including Sticky Fingers, the classic double album Exile on Main Street, and probably one of my favorites, Some Girls. Other arena and stadium filling acts like The Who, Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, Queen, Pink Floyd, Grand Funk benefited from the new technology and high-powered sound systems that could finally successfully deliver their music to a mass of live people. Classic live albums were recorded as a result, and that jump-started the careers of acts like Peter Frampton, of course, Kiss, REO Speedwagon, Bob Seger. New recording technology made it possible to finally capture the energy of these concerts. Now, disco and funk also rose to dominance in the 70s, bringing dance music to the mainstream with artists like Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, Parliament, Funkadelic, and Chic, timeless tracks that continue to pack dance floors and define the cultural movement. Now, often criticized by rock purists, disco did play a vital role in diversifying the sound of popular music and laying the groundwork for modern electronic and dance genres. And as I covered in one of my other videos, rock actually met up with disco too. You had disco songs by Kiss, Rod Stewart, and many others being released in the late 70s. And meanwhile, soul and funk artists infused their music with more ambitious themes of empowerment, identity, resistance, like James Brown's Say It Loud, I'm Black and Proud, and Parliament's ode to Washington, D.C. with their album Chocolate City. Then around 1977, punk rock emerged. It was raw. It was rebellious. It was a response to the polished, bombastic excess of mainstream rock and disco, and also a certain amount of rebellion against political corruption, economic instability, just bloated excesses of the day. Bands voiced anger and rebellion, raw frustration, and to strip down aggressive music that you didn't have to be a musical genius to play. That was part of its attraction. Just get 3 chords down, play them hard, have a strong message, and bands like the Ramones, Sex Pistols, the Stooges, Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, The Damned, The Clash, gave a voice to a certain sect of the population, disillusioned youth, and influenced the whole kind of do-it-yourself ethic of rock and roll. Meanwhile, on the other side of the spectrum, you have the singer-songwriter movement. Now, it had its roots in the 1960s, of course, with Bob Dylan and many others, but it continued to produce new talent in the 70s, including Bruce Springsteen. You had Paul Simon, Cat Stevens, of course, Jim Croce, James Taylor, Carole King, Jackson Browne, many others. And somewhat related to that, you had country rock emerging as well. The growth of country rock, a genre that, of course, blends country and rock, storytelling, instrumentation of country music with the energy and attitude of rock and roll. Bands in the 60s like Bob Dylan, also the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, Buffalo Springfield, got things started, but it gained full momentum in the 1970s with acts like Poco, Linda Ronstadt, and of course the Eagles, bringing country rock to the mainstream popularity. In fact, the Eagles' 1976 blockbuster album, Hotel California, just resonated with a huge audience. It became one of the top-selling albums of all time. Appealing to both rock fans and traditional country fans, it also kind of brought on the genre of Americana and alternative country. And of course, in the 1970s, there was progressive rock. Yep, a genre that pushed the boundaries of traditional rock, embracing more complex arrangements and conceptual themes, experimental instrumentation, building on the foundations laid down in the late 60s by classic groups like Pink Floyd, Yes, King Crimson, of course, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They incorporated elements from classical music, jazz, psychedelia. Unusual time signatures were also a mark of progressive rock. Extended instrumental sections, ambitious lyrics. Albums like, of course, The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, Close to the Edge by Yes, and even Rush's 2112 inspired future generations of musicians to go beyond just the standard verse, chorus, verse format of musical composition. Now, another reason the 1970s was unmatched in musical greatness is the quality of the songwriting and production. The 70s produced albums that are still regarded as masterpieces like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. As we mentioned, the Eagles' Hotel California. You had David Bowie with The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, Steely Dan's Aja, just too many to mention here. The civil rights movement, anti-Vietnam War protest, feminism, growing environmental consciousness, challenged traditional norms, gave rise to new ways of thinking. People were questioning authority. That came out in the music. They were seeking personal freedom, demanding social justice. And artists used their platforms not just for entertainment, but to comment on and critique society, like Marvin Gaye and the classic What's Going On, questioning war, poverty, and environmental concerns, while John Lennon's Imagine became an anthem for peace and unity. Music just became a mirror of the changing times in the 70s, helping people try to process the world around them. Every decade has produced incredible music, and they say whatever decade you grew up in, that is the music you will listen to for the rest of your life. And I'll be totally transparent. Born in 1961, late 1961. So my formative years, my teen years, all through school up until graduation from high school, was in the 70s. So that is one reason probably that I am so in love with that decade of music. But it was just uniquely rich in variety, influence, and to set a stage for modern music. There are bands that are still heard today. In fact, if you look at the Billboard Top 200 album chart, a lot of albums from that classic decade still on that chart. It gave us funk, disco, punk rock, progressive rock, hard rock, just a soundtrack that truly stood the test of the time. be sure to comment below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and tune in again for more Music Meanderings.